So this is just a small selection of my collection of SFX magazines. I've been a subscriber since year one, though not quite from issue one. It's been a constant throughout the past 30 years of my life, and it's introduced me to all manner of movies, books, TV shows and comics that have gone on to become my favourites. And the current issue has a feature on the 30 best science fiction TV shows over the past 30 years. So I thought I might go through the list, see if I agree with their selections, and if there's any shows they may have missed out. It's alphabetical, so first up is Babylon 5. No argument there. 30 years ago I was a massive fan. I bought the books and the magazines. It was one of the first serialised shows with a story arc planned out years in advance. It had a lot of changes along the way as they kept losing actors, but it was a very impressive achievement all the same. And all computer-generated special effects made it feel years ahead of its time. I haven't rewatched it for a while. I suspect it might not hold up so well. But yeah, maybe one day I'll buy the Blu-ray and find out. Next up is Battlestar Galactica. Again, I was a big fan of this. It was an amazing show. The writing, the acting, special effects, all very high standard. I rewatched it a few years ago and it still holds up. It was probably my favourite space-based show until The Expanse came along. That did not make the list, but it probably should have. Being Human is one of those shows where I watched every episode, but I was never a massive fan. The comedy aspects were probably more successful than the drama. But looking back, there were some good performances, and it was quite impressive how they managed to change the entire cast and keep going. So I may have to give it another look someday. Black Mirror is another fantastic show. I've been a fan of Charlie Brooker's work since he was a TV critic, and his work on Black Mirror took it to a whole new level, with wonderfully bleak tales of near-future satire. They don't all work. Season 4 is a bit of a mess, but it's got a very high hit rate, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next season coming later this year. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was another one of my favourite shows for many years. The writing and character development were light years ahead of anything else on at the time. Angel was just as good but darker. Firefly and Dollhouse were also good but cut short. Nowadays, of course, Joss Whedon is widely regarded as a terrible human being, but his work meant a lot to me for many years. And a lot more people worked in it than just one man, so I can still enjoy it for what it is. Carnival was cancelled after 2 seasons, but what was there was highly enjoyable. The 1930s Dust Bowl setting made it feel unique. It was full of quirky characters and great performances. The first season set up a whole load of mysteries, and then the second season just casually resolved them and then went on to do something else, which I thought was quite impressive. Yeah, I think I'm definitely due for a rewatch of that one. Doctor Who is obviously a favourite of mine, as you can tell by this channel. Its place on this list represents the new series, which has had its ups and downs over the years. But back in the day when Russell T Davies was in charge the first time, and then when Stephen Moffat took over, it was absolutely the best show on television. Later years hasn't been quite so good, with Chris Chibnall and the latest series. So maybe it's due for a rest and a reset, but I am looking forward to covering the early years, once I've got through the last few years of the classic series. Farscape was wonderfully weird. Blake 7 meets Buck Rogers, with puppets, animated episodes and crazy plot twists. I loved it at the time, and it's long overdue to make a comeback. Fringe started out as an X-Files clone, but soon developed a mythology all of its own, with parallel universes and bald aliens, and a whole season set in the future. It just got crazier as it went along, and had a very satisfying ending as well. Unlike many other shows on this list, it lasted the perfect amount of time. Futurama was one of my favourite animated shows for the first 4 years it was on. I bought all the DVDs, watched them over and over, loved the commentary tracks. Since then it's been cancelled and revived a bunch of times, and it's never been quite as good as the original run. But the most recent series has come close, and it's still going, so you never know, it may even surpass it. Game of Thrones is next. I read the books before it started, and the first few seasons are excellent adaptations. Unfortunately, once they got past the books and started doing their own thing, it did go off the rails, and the ending was a massive disappointment. But those early years will always be special. The Good Place has a great review by Stephen Moffat in the magazine, definitely worth reading that. It started off with a unique premise and then completely turned it on its head at the end of season 1, and then it just kept on reinventing itself with every few episodes right until the end. It's just a wonderfully written show with great characters and lots of humour as well. Life on Mars had a brilliant high concept premise and a killer soundtrack. The sequel Ashes to Ashes went on too long, but at least it did explain things before it ended. And it's a shame they never got to make the sequel series Lazarus, as that sounds like that would have been amazing. I'm still hoping they managed to turn it into a book or a movie at some point. Lost was another obsession of mine for many years. Every episode just threw up more and more mysteries to be solved. Sadly, it ended without explaining any of the more fundamental mysteries of the show, which felt like a bit of a cheat. So I haven't bothered to rewatch it since. But maybe I will someday, even though I know I'll probably just get frustrated all over again. Odyssey 5 was cancelled after one season with no resolution, but it was a great watch while it lasted, with a unique premise. If it had lasted the full 5 years that it was planned, then it could have been something very special indeed. Russell T Davies enthuses about it in the magazine, but it's hard to recommend anybody watching it now, as you'll only be disappointed by the ending. Over the Garden Wall is the only show on the list that I haven't watched. In fact, I'd never even heard of it before. Perhaps because it's a children's animation, and I don't have children, so there's a lot of kids' shows that I've missed out on. But I did enjoy Adventure Time though. That was a quality show. It starts out as a simplistic tale of good versus evil, but it gets more mature and complex as it goes along. The world building and character development is just top quality, and it would definitely go on my list. Pushing Daisies was one of a whole bunch of shows by Brian Fuller, full of quirky characters and set in a kind of heightened version of reality. This was probably the most popular of them, but I think I preferred Dead Like Me or Wonder Falls even. None of them lasted too long, but he did go on to make Hannibal, which is great, and the first season of American Gods, which was by far the best. Stargate SG-1 is another show where I collected all the DVDs as they were being released. It was fun to pop down to Woolworths every month and to pick up another 4 episodes for £20. Looking back, it was a bit of a rip-off. It started out very formulaic, but it got more serialised as it went along, and the spin-off series Atlantis was almost as good. And of course there was the other spin-off, Stargate Universe, which was technically much better than either of them, but sadly it ended on another big cliffhanger, so not something I would recommend rewatching. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is next. Of all the Star Trek shows over the past 30 years, this is probably still the best. As with Stargate, it started out with lots of hit-and-miss standalone episodes, but it gradually got more serialised as it went along, and the long-term character development was excellent. It's definitely way better than Voyager or Enterprise. The more recent Trek shows certainly look better, but Deep Space Nine definitely has the best characters. Star Wars The Clone Wars is not one I saw until quite recently. I watched a bunch of the so-called essential episodes before Ahsoka started, and even then I wasn't too keen on most of them. The quality is highly variable, but the best episodes are definitely worth watching. You just have to wade through a ton of dross to find them. The Mandalorian is definitely one of the highlights of the many live-action Star Wars shows that have been coming out recently. Andor was probably better overall, but Mandalorian came first. It proved that Star Wars can work on TV and live action, and so naturally it's getting turned into a film, which will probably be nowhere near as good. Stranger Things was one of Netflix's best shows. When it started, it felt really fresh, like a long-form Steven Spielberg movie. As it went on, it got a bit repetitive and started to run out of ideas, but there's still some amazing moments in every series, so I'm definitely looking forward to the finale. Supernatural I watched for all 15 seasons. I have no plans to rewatch it, as that would take forever. But again, it started as a monster of the week and got more serialised as it went along, which seems to be a pattern in a lot of the shows I've been covering. It probably went on a bit too long, 327 episodes, which is mad, but there was a lot of good stuff in there and it was always a fun watch. The Tower is next. I only watched the first season of this. It was very well made, but not one of my favourites, so move on. Torchwood Children of Earth was far and away the best of the 4 Torchwood seasons. The big idea was very strong, some of the scenes were absolutely chilling, and it was perfectly paced with every episode set on a different day. It really took the whole idea of Torchwood to a whole different level. Series 4 tried to match it, but just fell short. Twin Peaks The Return is next. The original was one of my all-time favourite shows, and this was definitely a worthwhile sequel. It's very different, there's a lot less humour than the original, and it's got more of the tone of Lynch's movies. But it's an incredible piece of work and a fitting end to Lynch's career. Ultraviolet was a great little mini-series. I did enjoy it at the time. It had lots of great ideas and was very strong throughout. I'm not quite sure if it's good enough to make the list though. The Walking Dead, I read the original comics first, and it did a good job of adapting them, cutting out a lot of the long-winded speeches and developing secondary characters, and he kept the overall thrust of the plot lines while still changing enough to make it shocking and unpredictable, even if you read all the comics. Again, it went on too long, and there's a few seasons in the middle where it drags, but the quality came back by the end, and the spin-offs are also pretty good. Watchmen was another quality miniseries, only tangentially related to the comics, but still a pretty good piece of work. I'm not sure I would have put it on the list. Maybe Westworld belongs there instead. That show was excellent for the first 2 seasons, although it did go off the rails after that. Finally, we have The X-Files, another one where I collected all the DVDs and read some of the books. The first time round I was more into the mythology episodes, trying to piece together the intricate conspiracy. In hindsight, it's obvious that they were just making it up as they went along. But the standalone Monster of the Week episodes still work really well, especially the ones written by Darren Morgan. And that is the list. Not surprisingly, I do agree with most of it. There's a few obvious shows missed out, like The Expanse, Mr. Robot, any of the superhero shows. But overall, I would say it's pretty solid. Let me know what you think in the comments. And press subscribe if you want to see more of my thoughts on science fiction, TV shows, movies, comics, books, and so on. See you next time.